Kings, great men, listen to me. Right now, somewhere in the world, a man is checking another man's salary. Another man is refreshing his rival's Instagram page. Another man is lying awake at night, grinding his teeth, obsessing over what his colleague drives, what his neighbor earns, what his friend has that he does not. And that man, that sleepless, obsessing, grinding man, believes with everything inside him that this is called ambition. I am here to tell you the hard, brutal, centuries-old truth. That is not ambition. That is a prison. And the cruelest part? He built it himself, locked himself inside it, and threw away the key, all while calling it drive. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, philosopher, statesman, advisor to princes. They called me ruthless. They called me dangerous. Good. Because ruthlessness, when properly directed, is the single most liberating force a man can possess. I did not come here today to flatter you. I came here to free you from the single biggest trap that is destroying modern men at a rate no war, no plague, and no tyrant ever could. That trap has a name. It is called comparison. And today, Kings, I am going to dissect it, destroy it, and replace it with something so powerful, so strategically sound, that by the time this video is over, you will look at the men around you, not as rivals, but as companions, not as competitors, as background noise. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you is not motivational speech. It is not feel-good wisdom. It is cold, surgical, battle-tested strategy that has outlived empires, survived the fall of civilizations, and remains just as deadly accurate today as it was when I first put quill to parchment in 15th century Florence. Let me paint a picture for you, Kings. It is the year 1494. Florence is burning, not with fire, but with politics, betrayal, and the insatiable hunger of men who could not stop watching each other. I watched it. I studied it. I documented it. And what I found was this. The men who fell, the men who lost their fortunes, their reputations, their heads, almost never fell because of an external enemy. They fell because of an internal one. They spent so much energy measuring themselves against the man next to them that they forgot to build themselves into something unmeasurable. You see, Kings, competition is seductive. There is something inside of man, something ancient and animal, that responds to the presence of a rival. When the heartbeat quickens, the jaw tightens, the mind sharpens. I understand it. Even I felt it. But here is what I learned, what the most powerful men in history have all eventually learned. The version of competition that destroys you is not the kind where you push against your limits. It is the kind where you push against another man. There is a catastrophic difference between those two. When your ambition is defined by your own standard, you are unconquerable. Because you set the target, you raise the target, and you alone decide when it has been met. Your energy is entirely internal. Your focus is entirely forward. Nothing can derail you because your destination exists inside you, not on someone else's balance sheet. But when your ambition is defined by another man's position, his car, his woman, his money, and his status, you have handed that man the keys to your soul. You have made him your God without his knowledge or your consent, and you will worship him, obsess over him, and secretly pray for his downfall, all while calling it ambition. Robert Greene, one of the sharpest strategic minds of the modern era, understood this completely. In his masterwork on power and human nature, he observed that the man who wins is not the one who fights the hardest. It is the one who chooses his battlefield wisely. A man who competes against others is always fighting on their terrain, by their rules, at their pace. But a man who competes against himself? He has already won the only war that matters, because he is the only one fighting on that battlefield. Kings, I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to think of a man, a colleague, a peer, a neighbor, someone whose success has at some point made you feel small. I know you have one. We all do. Now ask yourself honestly, how much mental energy have you spent on that man? How many minutes, hours, days of your life have you given over to thoughts of what he has, what you lack, what he did right, what you did wrong? How much of your mental real estate, that precious, finite, irreplaceable real estate, has been occupied by a tenant who pays you absolutely nothing in return? Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man alive in his time, wrote something so sharp it has echoed through 2,000 years of human history. He said that when you fill your mind with thoughts about what others are doing, why they are doing it, what they are thinking, what they are scheming, you lose the opportunity of doing something else. You rob yourself, not them, you. A man with an empire at his fingertips understood that his most valuable resource was not gold, not legions, not territory. It was attention. And attention spent watching another man is attention stolen from your own life. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War that the supreme general is not the one who wins every battle. It is the one who wins without fighting. The man who has mastered himself has no need to fight others, because he has already achieved dominance over the only opponent who was ever truly capable of defeating him, himself. Think about that, kings. Every great conqueror in history, Caesar, Napoleon, Alexander, was eventually undone. But do you know what undid them? Not a more powerful enemy. Napoleon was not defeated by Wellington's brilliance alone. He was defeated by his own recklessness, his own ego, his own desperate need to be seen as the greatest. He started competing against the memory of Alexander the Great, instead of building something entirely his own. And the moment a man starts competing with a ghost, he has already lost. Now compare that man to the architect, the builder, the silent strategist who disappears from the public eye, fortifies himself in private, builds his empire brick by brick, and reappears when the structure is complete. No one competed with him, because no one knew the race was even happening. That is the man I want you to become. Here is something that will disturb you, kings, and I say that intentionally, because comfort is the enemy of growth, and I have never been in the business of comfort. The reason you compare yourself to other men is not because you are weak. It is because you have been trained to. From the moment you entered school, perhaps earlier, you were placed in a system that sorted you, ranked you, graded you against the boy sitting next to you. Your worth was not measured against your own potential. It was measured against a percentile, against a class average, against the performance of 20 other children who truthfully had nothing to do with your destiny. And the habit became neurological. The comparison became automatic. The need for external validation became hardwired. So Epictetus, a man who began his life as a slave and ended it as one of the most revered philosophers in Rome, wrote something that should be carved above the door of every man's home. He said that when we care less about the opinions of others, we become free from all striving and competition. He said that freedom, true freedom, lies in doing what is good for you, not in doing what others think you should do. A man who was born in chains, a man who owned nothing, a man who had every reason to compare his suffering to the luxury of those around him. And yet, he was freer than any of them, because he understood that comparison is a voluntary act. Nobody forces you to measure yourself against another man. You choose to. And the moment you stop choosing to, the moment you redirect that energy inward, something extraordinary happens. You become impossible to intimidate because you are no longer competing in anyone else's game. You cannot be threatened by a man's promotion if you are building something his employer could never offer you. You cannot be diminished by a man's car if your ambition operates on an entirely different road. You cannot feel inferior to a man's relationship if you are working on a version of yourself that makes you genuinely valuable, not performatively impressive. This, kings, is not philosophy. This is strategy. This is the architecture of power. Now pause right here, kings, because I want to know something. I want to hear from you. Think about the man you have been comparing yourself to. It could be a friend, a coworker, someone you follow on social media. The man whose life, whose success, whose image has occupied space in your mind that it did not earn. Drop his role in the comments, not his name, but his role. Your coworker, your cousin, your old classmate, your former best friend. And tell me this, has comparing yourself to that man ever, even once, made you better? Or has it only ever made you bitter? Drop it below. I want to read every single one, because what you write in that comment section is going to tell you more about where you are in life than any mirror ever could. Kings, a few minutes ago, I showed you the prison. I showed you the trap. I showed you exactly how comparison steals from you silently, daily, ruthlessly, without ever announcing itself. Now I'm going to show you the weapon. I'm going to show you not just why you must stop competing with other men, but what you must do instead. Because strategy without a replacement is not strategy. It is merely a complaint. And I have never been in the business of complaints. I have always been in the business of power. So let us talk about power. In the Florence of my time, there were two kinds of men. And kings, I want you to listen to this carefully, because nothing has changed in 500 years. The first kind of man woke up every morning asking, "What does my rival have that I do not?" He measured the length of another man's sword before sharpening his own. He watched his neighbor's harvest before tending his own field. He counted another man's coins before building his own treasury. This man was perpetually reactive, perpetually behind, perpetually resentful, and, most fatally, perpetually predictable. Because when you are obsessed with another man's game, you will always be one step behind him. You are playing catch-up in a race you were never supposed to enter. The second kind of man woke up every morning asking, "What did I fail to do yesterday that I must correct today?" He did not look outward for measurement. He looked inward. He studied himself the way a general studies a map before battle, not to find comfort, but to find vulnerabilities, not to celebrate what was strong, but to fortify what was weak. Which man do you think built empires? Jordan Peterson, one of the sharpest psychological minds of the modern era, wrote something that I wish I had been able to read when I was advising the Medici. He wrote, "Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today." Now, kings, I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the simplicity of it is deceptive. It sounds humble. It sounds quiet. It sounds almost passive. It is not. It is the most aggressive, most relentless, most unstoppable philosophy a man can adopt. Because when you commit to competing only against your yesterday self, you set a standard that nobody else in the world can interfere with. Nobody can threaten your progress. Nobody can overtake your benchmark. Nobody can demoralize you by achieving something you have not yet achieved, because their achievement lives in a completely different race, a race that has nothing to do with you. Think about what this means in practice, kings. Every single morning, the question is not, Is he further ahead than me? The question is, am I further ahead than I was 24 hours ago? Even if the answer is yes by 1%, you are winning. Even if the answer is yes by one conversation, one page read, 1 kilogram lifted, one discipline maintained, you are winning. You are running a race that is entirely yours, an undefeatable race. And here is the strategic genius buried inside this philosophy that most men miss entirely. When you stop watching other men and start building yourself, something extraordinary happens. Other men start watching you. Obsession with self-development radiates an aura that obsession with others never can. The man who is entirely focused on his own ascent carries himself differently. He speaks differently. He moves differently. He does not flinch when other men display their wealth because he is too occupied building his own. He does not feel threatened when another man succeeds because another man's success simply does not register as relevant data in his mental architecture. That man does not attract attention by chasing it. He attracts it by being completely, utterly, magnificently indifferent to whether it arrives. Now let us go deeper, kings, because identifying the wrong game is only half the battle. The second half is building the right one. Robert Greene, who has studied power with more surgical precision than perhaps any living writer, made an observation in his work on mastery that has stayed with me across centuries. He said that the process of mastering yourself begins not with comparing your output to others, but with going so deep into who you are, your unique composition, your singular wiring, your specific strengths, that you eventually become incomparable. Read that again, kings. Incomparable, not superior, not inferior. Simply impossible to measure against another man because you have built something so distinctly, so specifically, so uncompromisingly yours that the standard metrics no longer apply. Think of the greatest men throughout history. Think of Leonardo da Vinci, a man so eccentrically gifted across so many disciplines that his contemporaries could not categorize him. Was he a painter, a sculptor, an inventor, a scientist, a philosopher? The answer was all of them, and none of them simultaneously. He had escaped the box entirely. Nobody could say Leonardo was behind, and because nobody could determine what race Leonardo was even running. Think of Napoleon Bonaparte before his ego devoured him. In his prime years, Napoleon did not study what other generals were doing and try to replicate their strategies. He invented entirely new ones. He moved armies faster than anyone thought armies could move. He attacked from angles that military doctrine said were impossible. His genius was not that he was better at the existing game. It was that he rewrote the rules of the game entirely. He became unbeatable, not because he outcompeted his rivals, but because he stopped playing their game and forced them to play his. This, kings, is what I want for you. Not to beat the man next to you at the life he has already built, but to build something so distinctly yours that there is no man next to you. There is only you, your mission, and the territory ahead. Ask yourself right now, and answer this honestly, because dishonesty in private is the most expensive kind of dishonesty there is. Have you ever, even once, sat down and mapped the specific architecture of your own strengths? Not what society told you to value, not what your family told you to pursue, not what social media told you to aspire to, but what is genuinely, organically, powerfully yours. Because here is what I observed in every prince, every general, every strategist I ever advised. The men who found their singular gift and went to war with it, those men were untouchable. Not because the world ran out of enemies, but because their enemies could no longer locate them on a familiar map. You cannot compete with a man you cannot categorize. You cannot threaten a man you cannot measure. Unbuild the fortress, kings. Build it deep inside your own territory. Build it out of your unique gifts, your specific vision, your relentless daily discipline. And then, only then, will you understand what true power feels like. It does not feel like victory over another man. It feels like the complete absence of the need to defeat anyone at all. Kings, pause here with me for just a moment. If this video has already begun to reshape something inside your thinking, if something I have said has cracked open a door in your mind that you did not know was closed, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button, not for me, for you. Because what I am teaching on this channel is not content, it is a curriculum. A systematic, battle-tested, on centuries refined education in the kind of power that actually lasts, the power that is built from the inside out. Every video I release is another chapter, and if you walk away from this one without subscribing, you will miss the next chapter, and the chapter after that. The kings who subscribe are the kings who are building. The rest are still watching from the outside. Make your decision, hit subscribe, and let us keep building together. Now, kings, there is a third element to this strategy that most men overlook entirely, and it may be the most lethal one of all: silence. I spent years watching powerful men destroy themselves, not through failure, not through weakness, but through the compulsive need to announce their progress. They could not resist telling the world what they were building. They could not contain the hunger to be seen, acknowledged, validated, while the work was still unfinished. And I watched, from the corridors of the Florentine court, as announcement after announcement invited attack, undermining, jealousy, and sabotage from men who would have been entirely harmless had they simply not known the plan existed. Robert Greene captured this brilliantly. He observed that power is in many ways a game of appearances, and the man who says less than necessary always appears greater than the man who speaks constantly. Silence is not passivity. Silence is architecture. When you are silent about your ambitions, your plans, your progress, you are building a wall around your mission that no rival can scale because they cannot locate the entrance. Think about this in the context of social media, kings, because this is where modern men are committing the most catastrophic strategic errors of their lives. The man who posts every gym session, every business win, every travel photo, every motivational quote. That man believes he is building an image. He is not. He is building a target. He is advertising his ambitions to every person who ever resented him, every rival who ever underestimated him, every enemy who ever smiled to his face. The truly dangerous man. The man accumulating in silence. The man whose social media shows nothing, whose private calendar is relentless, whose network is building underground, while the performative man performs above ground. The man nobody knows is in the race, until suddenly, he has already won it. But Theodore Roosevelt said it simply and devastatingly: comparison is the thief of joy. But I would take that further. Premature announcement is the thief of victory. The moment you tell the world what you are building, you invite the world to have an opinion about it. And the world's opinion, particularly from people who are not building anything, is the single most corrosive force that can be applied to a man with a vision. Guard your mission the way a general guards military intelligence. Share it only with those who need to know. Execute it in private. Reveal it only through results. Because results, kings, cannot be argued with. Results cannot be undermined by jealousy. Results cannot be eroded by other people's doubt. By the time the world sees what you have built, it will already be complete, and there will be nothing left to do except acknowledge what is already there. That is power. That is strategy. That is the Machiavellian way. Kings, I want to ignite a debate in the comment section right now. Here is the question, and I want you to really think about this before you answer. Is social media a tool for building power, or a trap that destroys it? Some of you will say it is a tool. That personal branding, visibility, and influence are built in the public eye, and the man who operates in total silence will simply be overlooked. That in the modern world, attention is currency, and refusing to compete for it is strategic suicide. Others will say it is a trap. That social media is nothing more than a carefully designed machine for manufacturing comparison, manufacturing inadequacy, and manufacturing the very competitive obsession I have been dissecting in this video. Who is right? Drop your argument in the comments. Be specific. Be ruthless. Be honest. Because the kings who engage in this conversation are the kings who are actually thinking. And thinking, as I have always said, is the rarest and most powerful discipline a man can develop. Kings, we have covered the trap. We have covered the philosophy. We have covered the 3 strategic alternatives a man of power chooses over comparison. But now, right now, I want to go somewhere most men are afraid to go. I want to talk about the real cost, not the philosophical cost, not the abstract cost, the life cost. Because some of you have been nodding along to everything I have said so far, and you understand it in your mind. But understanding a thing in your mind and feeling its weight in your bones are 2 entirely different experiences. And it is only when a man feels the weight of a truth in his bones that he truly acts on it. So let me put the weight on your bones. Seneca, one of the wealthiest, most politically powerful, most philosophically sharp men in all of Rome, wrote something so devastating that it has haunted me across centuries. He wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Read that again, kings. Not that life is short, that we waste it. And nothing in the entire catalog of human waste consumes more of a man's irreplaceable time than the obsessive monitoring of another man's life. Let me give you the mathematics of this, because I was always a man who respected precision over poetry. A man who spends 45 minutes per day, just 45 minutes, scrolling through social media, comparing his circumstances to the curated highlight reels of men he barely knows, will waste over 270 hours per year on that activity alone. That is 11 full days, kings. 11 days every single year, spent inside someone else's life instead of building your own. In 5 years, that man has spent 55 days, nearly 2 months of waking hours, watching other men live. In 10 years, he has gifted 4 months of his conscious existence to the altar of comparison. 4 months he will never reclaim. 4 months that could have been invested in a skill, a business, a relationship, a body, a mind. Of 4 months that dissolved into the poisonous mist of measuring himself against men who are also simultaneously measuring themselves against other men. All of them wasting time watching each other instead of building anything real. This is not an epidemic of laziness, kings. This is an epidemic of misdirected energy, and it is the single most expensive epidemic of the modern age, because it costs not money, not reputation, not status. It costs time. And time, as Seneca knew 2,000 years ago, is the one currency that cannot be earned back, borrowed, or manufactured. He said, "People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. You lock your door at night, you guard your wallet, or you password protect your phone. But you hand your hours, your most precious, unrepeatable, finite resource, to complete strangers, to the ghost of a rival, to the performance of a man whose life behind the scenes looks nothing like what he shows the world. This stops today. Now, kings, I want to make this practical, because I am not a poet, I am a strategist, and a strategy that cannot be applied is not a strategy at all. It is a wish. So let me tell you precisely what the man who has abandoned comparison and chosen self-mastery actually does differently. Not what he thinks, not what he believes, what he does. The first thing he does is establish a personal standard. Not a standard borrowed from society, not a standard reverse-engineered from what his peers have achieved. A standard built entirely from his own vision of who he is becoming and what he is building. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commander of the greatest military force alive in his time, burdened with more responsibility than any man in the ancient world, still sat down privately every single morning and asked himself one question. Am I doing what a human being was made to do? Not. Am I doing better than the general next to me? Not. Am I wealthier than the senator across the hall? Am I doing what I was made to do? That is the question of a man who has escaped the comparison trap entirely. He has defined his purpose so clearly, so personally, so specifically, that no other man's progress can be used as a measuring stick for it, because his mission is entirely his own. The second thing the self-mastered man does is build what I call a discipline architecture. Marcus Aurelius described it beautifully in his private journals, the work he never intended for the world to read, which makes it the most honest, strategic document ever produced by a powerful man. He wrote about getting out of bed when it was cold and dark, and every comfort in the palace whispered at him to stay still. He wrote about the daily discipline of attending to duty, not because it was enjoyable, but because it was necessary. He understood something that most men in positions of power forget almost immediately. Comfort is the enemy of capability. The man who builds a life of comfort builds a life of stagnation. The man who builds a life of deliberate, chosen discomfort, who wakes when it is difficult, who trains when it is painful, who studies when it is tedious, that man is building something inside himself that no external rival can threaten. Because you cannot take discipline from a man. You can take his money. You can take his status. You can take his connections. But you cannot reach inside a man's chest and remove the 10,000 hours of deliberate practice he has accumulated in the dark, in private, before the world was watching. That is permanent wealth, kings. That is the kind of capital that compound interests over a lifetime. The third thing the self-mastered man does, and this is where I want you to pay very close attention, is he removes the audience from his internal theater. Seneca wrote that nothing is more revealing of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to sit with himself in quiet and be entirely content with his own company, and not distracted, not performing, not measuring. Just present, purposeful, and entirely sovereign within the kingdom of his own mind. Most men today cannot sit alone for 30 minutes without reaching for a phone, cannot sit in silence without filling it with noise, cannot be still without becoming anxious. And that anxiety, that desperate need for external stimulation, is not coincidental. It is the direct consequence of a mind that has been trained to look outward for its sense of worth instead of inward. The man who can sit alone in silence with nothing but his own thoughts and find that company sufficient is a man who has achieved something most men never will. He has become self-referencing. His validation is internal. His standard is personal. His ambition is entirely sovereign. That man is dangerous in the most magnificent way, because you cannot manipulate a man who does not need your approval. You cannot control a man who has no interest in your opinion. You cannot compete with a man who is not competing with you. Kings, I want to introduce you to a concept that the ancient world understood with startling clarity, a concept that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten in its frenzied rush to be everywhere, do everything, and outperform everyone simultaneously. It is the concept of singular focus. In my time as a statesman, I observed something consistent across every man who achieved lasting power. Not temporary power, not borrowed power, not inherited power, but the kind of power that compounds, multiplies, and endures. Every single one of them, without exception, had identified the one arena where their natural gifts met their deepest discipline, and they had gone so catastrophically deep into that arena that they became, in the truest sense, irreplaceable. Not well-rounded. Irreplaceable. There is a profound difference. The world rewards excellence in one thing infinitely more than it rewards competence in 10 things. The surgeon who can perform one specific operation better than any other surgeon alive will always earn more, attract more, and command more respect than the surgeon who can perform 10 operations adequately. The business that does one thing with world-class execution will always outlast the business that attempts to do everything with average execution. Epictetus, the former slave who became the most sought-after philosophy teacher in all of Rome, understood this completely. He wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Clarity of identity before action. Know who you are and what you are building before you expend a single calorie of energy. Because energy expended without clarity is energy wasted. And in the architecture of a great life, wasted energy is the building material that could have built an empire. Think about the men in your own life who command the deepest respect, not the loudest men, not the most visible men, not the men with the most followers. The men who command actual respect. The men whose opinion carries weight in a room. Those men are almost always defined by one thing. They are extraordinarily, unmistakably, uncompromisingly themselves. They have gone so deep into who they are that there is no performance anymore, no posturing, no comparison. Just the finished architecture of a man who knows exactly what he is. That is your destination, kings. Not to be better than the man next to you. To be so unmistakably, so inescapably yourself that the man next to you is simply irrelevant. One final thing I want to address in this segment, kings, and it is perhaps the most dangerous manifestation of competitive obsession that I observe in the modern era. The reactive life. There is a man, and you have met him, you may have been him, who makes every major life decision in reaction to another man's success. He starts a business not because he has a vision, but because his friend started one and it appears to be working. He buys a car not because he needs it, or even particularly wants it, but because his colleague just upgraded. He pursues a woman not because of a genuine connection, but because another man expressed interest in her, and suddenly she became a prize worth competing for. This man is not living a life. He is reacting to one. He is a chess piece being moved by forces he has not examined and would not consciously choose if he stopped long enough to think. And the cruelest part of the reactive life is that it is always one step behind. By definition, a reaction is a response to something that has already happened. The reactive man is perpetually chasing a yesterday that was never his to begin with. Marcus Aurelius wrote, and this is one of the most powerful observations ever committed to private paper. It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. Read that slowly. Let the full weight of it land. You love yourself more than you love any other person alive. That is not a moral failing. It is a biological fact. And yet, you care more about what other people think of you then you care about what you think of yourself. You have inverted your own value system. You have placed the most important opinion, your own, beneath the opinions of people who are not living your life, not building your future, and not lying awake at night with the consequences of your choices. That inversion is the source of the reactive life, and the cure, the only cure, is to re-invert it. To consciously, deliberately, repeatedly return authority over your own standard back to yourself. To ask not, what will they think of this decision? But, does this decision serve the man I am becoming? That single shift, from external referencing to internal referencing, is the most powerful strategic adjustment a man can make in his life. Everything else flows from it. Kings, I want to stir the room right now, because I know there are men watching this who are about to push back, and I want them to, because pushback is the currency of real conversation. Here is the provocation. Some men will say that competition is the engine of greatness, that without a rival, without someone to chase, someone to beat, someone to measure yourself against, most men will simply settle. That comfort, not competition, is the real enemy, and that men need external pressure to unlock their peak performance. Is that true? Or is that the philosophy of a man who has never truly built anything from the inside out? A man who needs an enemy to motivate him because he has not yet found the discipline to motivate himself? I want you to answer this, right now, in the comments. Tell me, are you the kind of man who needs a rival to reach your potential? Or are you the kind of man who is your own rival? And here is the real question hidden inside that question. If you need a rival to perform, who is truly in control of your life? You or the rival? Drop your answer below. I will be reading every single comment. And the most thoughtful response, the one that makes me reconsider, challenge, or sharpen my own argument, I will pin at the top. Fight me, kings. That is how we all get sharper. Kings, before we go any deeper, I need you to do something right now. If you have a brother, a son, a friend, a colleague, any man in your life who is currently trapped in the comparison cycle, any man you know who is burning his hours watching other men live instead of building his own life, share this video with him right now, not later. Now, because the message I am delivering is time-sensitive in a way that most men do not appreciate until it is too late. Every day a man spends in the comparison trap is a day he will never recover. And the most powerful thing you can do for a king in your life is hand him a weapon he did not know existed. Hit share, tag him in the comments, send it directly, because real kings do not hoard wisdom. They distribute it. They understand that the elevation of the men around them does not diminish their own. It amplifies it. Share this video, right now. And when you come back, because I know you will come back, what follows next will be the most strategically important section of this entire video. Do not miss it. Kings, everything I have given you so far has been architecture, the philosophy, the psychology, the strategic framework, the understanding of why comparison destroys and why self-mastery builds. But a blueprint that sits on a table is not a house. A strategy that lives only in the mind is not a life. So right now, right here, I am going to give you the actual daily operating system of the man who has abandoned competition with others and chosen instead to wage the only war that ever truly produces a winner, the war against his own limitations. I'm going to give you 5 daily practices, not theories, not concepts, practices, things you will do, not think about doing, starting today. Because one of the most dangerous lies a man can tell himself is, I will start when I am ready. The man waiting to be ready is the man who never begins. Readiness is not a condition that arrives. It is a condition that is built through action, not through waiting. So let us build. The first practice, kings, is one I observed in the greatest men of my time and every era I have studied since. It is the practice of the morning audit. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, a man who commanded legions and governed an empire that stretched across 3 continents, began every single morning, not with the affairs of state, not with the dispatches from his generals, not with the reports from his treasury. He began every morning with himself. He sat down with a journal, and he asked himself the same essential question in different forms, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. What kind of man am I becoming? And is the man I am today worthy of the man I am trying to build? He documented his answers privately, not for an audience, not for posterity, for himself. He was so ruthlessly honest in those pages, calling out his own laziness, his own temptations, his own failings, that scholars who discovered those journals centuries later were astonished that the most powerful man on earth had spent so much of his private time holding himself accountable to a standard that nobody else was demanding of him. Nobody was grading Marcus Aurelius, kings. Nobody could fire him. Nobody could punish him. He was the emperor. The rules stopped at his throne, and yet he held himself to a standard more rigorous than any external authority could ever have imposed. That is the morning audit. Every morning, before your phone, before social media, before the noise of the world floods in and claims the first hours of your day, sit down. Write 3 things. First, write the single most important task you must complete today to move your mission forward. Not the most urgent thing, the most important thing. There is a catastrophic difference. The most urgent things are usually other people's priorities, wearing the costume of emergency. The most important thing is always yours, the brick that belongs in your own wall, not someone else's. Second, write 1 habit, 1 pattern, 1 tendency in yourself that you are actively working to correct, not to shame yourself, to target it. Because a man who cannot name his weakness cannot fortify it. And an unfortified weakness is an open gate for the enemy to walk through. Third, and this is the one most men skip, which is precisely why most men never build what they claim to want. Write 1 thing you are grateful for that has nothing to do with another person's validation. Something internal, something yours. Because gratitude directed inward, at your own capacity, your own resilience, your own progress, is one of the most powerful anchoring tools a man can possess. It reminds you that you are already enough to build from. You don't need another man's approval to begin. This audit takes 7 minutes. 7 minutes every morning. And it will compound over a year into an entirely different man than the one who wakes up and immediately reaches for his phone to check what the world did while he was sleeping. The second practice, kings, is one that the Stoics understood with a precision that modern comfort culture has almost entirely dismantled. It is called voluntary discomfort. Seneca wrote, and this is one of the most tactically genius observations ever committed to philosophy, that a man should periodically live as if he had lost everything. Eat simply. Sleep without luxury. Strip away the comforts that have become necessities, not as punishment, as practice, as training, so that if fortune ever turns, as fortune always eventually does, the man who has practiced discomfort is not shattered by its sudden arrival. He has already lived there, or he has already survived it. It holds no terror for him. Napoleon Bonaparte, the most strategically focused military mind in the post-medieval world, understood this at the cellular level. His private secretary documented that Napoleon regularly worked 16 to 18 hours per day. Not because he had to, because he had built discomfort into the architecture of his ambition so completely that comfort had lost its grip on him. He could sleep on the ground in the middle of a campaign and wake sharper than men who had slept in palaces. His contemporaries recorded that they never saw him tired, never saw him distracted, never saw him lacking competence, even when exhausted in body or under intense pressure. He had made discomfort his ally, not his enemy. Kings, I am not telling you to sleep on the floor, and I'm telling you to build something hard into your day, deliberately, consciously, consistently, that trains your nervous system to associate effort with identity rather than associating comfort with safety. Wake up 30 minutes earlier than you need to, not to scroll, to think, to read, to plan, to be alone with your own mind before the world demands access to it. Train your body, not for aesthetics, but for the daily reminder that you can do hard things on command. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece understood this intuitively. Chrysippus, one of the most brilliant of the Stoic scholars, was a long-distance runner. Cleanthes, who succeeded Zeno as head of the Stoic school, was a boxer. These were not athletes who happened to philosophize. No, they were philosophers who understood that physical discipline and mental discipline are not separate. They are the same discipline, expressed in different arenas. When you push your body past comfort in the morning, when you choose the cold shower, the early run, the heavy lift, you are not just building a physique. You are building the neurological architecture of a man who chooses difficulty when ease is available. And that architecture transfers. The man who can push through physical discomfort at 6 in the morning is the man who can push through professional discomfort at 2 in the afternoon. The man who can hold himself to a standard when no one is watching at dawn is the man who holds himself to a standard when no one is watching at midnight. Voluntary discomfort is not punishment. It is practice for power. So the third practice, kings, is perhaps the one that will feel most counterintuitive in a world that worships busyness. It is the practice of identifying and protecting your singular daily mission. Here is the trap that swallows modern men whole. They confuse activity with progress. They fill their days with tasks, emails, meetings, errands, obligations, and they collapse into bed at night exhausted, feeling productive, having moved absolutely nothing that matters forward by a single inch. Napoleon himself addressed this more precisely than almost any man in history. His approach to winning was not about mystical genius. It was discipline, focus, and adaptability. He concentrated effort on decisive points, adapted faster than anyone else, and built systems that made execution inevitable. He did not try to win everywhere simultaneously. He identified the single decisive point, the point where victory would cascade into everything else, and he concentrated everything he had on that point. That is your model, kings. Every single day, before the day begins, you must identify one thing, one task, one action, one movement that represents genuine forward progress on your primary mission. Not a task that makes you look busy. Not a task that makes someone else comfortable. The task that, if completed, makes tomorrow's version of you measurably more powerful than today's. James Clear, who spent years studying the science of human habit and behavior, observed that progress is not built through massive, dramatic actions. It is built through the daily compounding of small, deliberate, consistent moves. So a 1% improvement every single day compounded over 1 year does not produce a 1% better man. It produces a man who is 37 times more capable than the one who started. Not 37% better. 37 times better. That is the mathematics of consistency applied to a singular direction. The man who tries to improve in 15 directions simultaneously improves in none. The man who improves in one direction, relentlessly, daily, without exception, becomes unmatchable in that direction within months. This is why singular focus is not a limitation. It is a superpower. Identify your mission. Identify the daily action that feeds it. Protect that action as if your empire depends on it, because it does. The fourth practice, kings, mirrors the morning audit, but its purpose is different, and in many ways more important. It is called the evening reckoning. Seneca performed this ritual every single night without exception. He wrote, "When the light has been removed, and my wife has fallen silent, aware of this habit that is now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I have done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. Every night, without mercy, without excuse, without the comfortable revision that the human mind is so extraordinarily skilled at applying to its own failures. Kings, the gap between the man you are and the man you are capable of becoming is not filled by motivation. It is not filled by inspiration. It is not filled by watching videos or reading books or attending seminars. It is filled by the daily, unflinching, private examination of where you fell short, and the equally private, equally unflinching commitment to close that gap tomorrow. Most men do not do this, and here is exactly why. It is uncomfortable. It requires a kind of honesty with oneself that our egos have been specifically engineered to resist. The mind that compares itself to others constantly is the same mind that edits its own failures into acceptable narratives. The mind that competes externally never develops the capacity to audit internally, because to audit yourself honestly means confronting the possibility that you, not your circumstances, not your competition, not your history, are the primary obstacle between where you are and where you want to be. That is not a comfortable conclusion, but it is a liberating one, because the moment you accept that you are the primary variable in your own equation, the moment you stop handing that authority to luck, to rivals, to timing, to circumstance, you also accept that you have the power to change the outcome. And a man who accepts full responsibility for his outcomes is a man who cannot be permanently defeated. He can only be temporarily delayed. Every night before sleep, 3 questions. What did I do today that moved my mission forward? What did I do, or fail to do, that moved it backward? And what specifically will I do differently tomorrow? No more than 10 minutes. No journal required if that is not your style. But the questions must be asked, because the day that is not examined is a day whose lessons evaporate, and a man who does not learn from yesterday is condemned to repeat it, which means his past becomes his ceiling, not his foundation. The 5th practice, kings, is one that Machiavelli understands more personally than perhaps any philosopher who has ever lived. Because I watched men destroyed by it, not by armies, not by tyrants, by proximity. The men around you are not neutral. There is no neutral. Every man in your circle is either building your vision or diluting it, either sharpening you or softening you, either challenging you upward or pulling you down to the comfort of their own ceiling. This is not cynicism. This is architecture. Seneca wrote, and I want you to memorize this, kings, because it may be the single most strategically important sentence in this entire video. Tell me who you walk with, and I will tell you who you will become. Not who you were, who you will become. Because the men around you are not just company, they are environment. And environment, as every farmer, every biologist, every strategist has known since the dawn of human civilization shapes the organism that grows inside it. A seed planted in fertile soil becomes something entirely different from the same seed planted in desert sand. Same seed, different environment, radically different result. The man who surrounds himself with men who compete with each other, gossip about each other, monitor each other's progress with resentment, that man will find it nearly impossible to escape the comparison trap, because his environment constantly reinfects him with it. Every conversation pulls him back into the game he is trying to abandon. But the man who deliberately, surgically constructs a circle of men who are building, men who discuss ideas instead of people, strategies instead of gossip, vision instead of yesterday's regrets, that man has created an environment where self-mastery is not the exception. It is the standard. You do not rise to the level of your goals, kings. You fall to the level of your environment. This is not my philosophy alone. This is biological fact, psychological fact, and historical fact simultaneously. Show me the 5 men a king spends the most time with, and I will show you his future with extraordinary accuracy. Guard that circle. Guard it the way I guarded the secrets of state, with precision, with intentionality, and with the understanding that proximity is destiny. Kings, I am issuing you a direct challenge right now, and I want you to accept it publicly in the comment section. Starting tomorrow morning, just tomorrow, I want you to try one of the 5 practices I just outlined. Just one. The morning audit, the voluntary discomfort, the singular mission, the evening reckoning, the circle audit. Pick one. Do it tomorrow. And then come back to this comment section and tell me 3 things. Which practice you chose, what you discovered about yourself when you tried it, and whether you found it easier or harder than you expected. This is not a motivational exercise, kings. This is a diagnostic, because the practice you choose will tell you something about where you are. The difficulty you experience will tell you something about what needs work. And the discipline you demonstrate by actually doing it, rather than nodding, closing this video, and forgetting, will tell you something about who you are becoming. The kings who accept this challenge publicly, in the comments section right now, are the kings who are building. Everyone else is still watching. Which one are you? Drop your commitment below. Tag a brother who needs to hear this. And stay with me, because what comes next is the final chapter. And I have saved the most important truth for last. Kings, we have walked a long road together in this video. We began with a question, a simple, surgical question about where the most powerful men in history directed their energy. We dismantled the prison of comparison. We examined what it costs a man in time, in mental real estate, in irreplaceable hours of his one irrepeatable life. We built the strategic alternative, the philosophy of competing with your yesterday self, building in silence, mastering your own architecture before daring to measure it against another man's. We constructed the daily operating system, the 5 practices that separate the men who talk about building from the men who actually build. And now, right now, we arrive at the part of this conversation that I have been building towards since the first word, the part about legacy. Because kings, everything I have shared with you today, every strategy, every discipline, every philosophy, is ultimately in service of one thing. Not success, not status, not money, not even power in the conventional sense. Legacy. And I want to tell you what legacy actually is. Because most men have been given a lie about it. A comfortable, flattering, ultimately useless lie. And I intend to destroy that lie before I am finished speaking today. The lie goes like this. Legacy is what you leave behind after you are gone. Legacy is the obituary, the monument, the name carved in stone. Legacy is posthumous. It belongs to the future, not the present. And therefore, a man can spend his entire living years focused on the wrong things and still somehow manufacture a great legacy at the end. That is the lie, and it is a dangerous one, because it allows a man to defer, to postpone, to say, I will build something meaningful eventually, just not today. Today, I am still comparing, still competing, still watching, still reacting. But eventually, I will shift. Eventually, I will build. Well, eventually, I will become the man I keep describing myself as. Kings. I wrote The Prince in 1513. I was in exile. I had been stripped of my position, my influence, my access to the corridors of power that had defined my entire adult life. I had been tortured. I had been humiliated. I had been cast out by the very Medici family whose political rise I had facilitated. And I sat down in a small farmhouse outside Florence with nothing but my mind and my quill, and I wrote one of the most enduring strategic documents in the history of human civilization. Not because I was trying to leave a legacy, because I could not stop building, because the habit of thought, the discipline of analysis, the compulsion to extract lessons from everything I had witnessed and translate them into something useful, that was so deeply embedded in the architecture of who I was that not even exile, not even torture, not even the complete dismantling of my public life could interrupt it. Legacy, kings, is not what you plan to leave behind. Legacy is the residue of who you actually were, day by day, decision by decision, discipline by discipline, across the full length of your life. You cannot manufacture it at the end. You cannot buy it with a late-stage donation. You cannot construct it from the outside with enough wealth or enough status or enough followers. Legacy is built in the daily private moments that no audience ever witnesses, in the choice to do the hard thing when the easy thing was available, in the discipline maintained when no one was watching, in the standard held to when the world would never have known if you lowered it. I wrote it myself in The Prince. It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. The title means nothing. The man behind it means everything. And the man behind the title is built in private, long before the title ever arrives. Kings, I want to introduce you to a framework that I've observed across centuries of studying powerful men and the marks they left on the world. There are 3 kinds of legacy, and every man reading this, whether he knows it or not, is currently building one of them. The first is what I call the borrowed legacy. This is the legacy of the man who spent his life measuring himself against others and defining his success by the standards of his era, his culture, his peer group. He achieved things, sometimes impressive things, but he achieved them in response to external pressure rather than internal vision. His legacy is real, but it is not fully his. It belongs partly to the rivals who motivated him, the audience that validated him, the culture that defined the game he played. When the culture shifts, and it always does, his legacy shifts with it. He is remembered, if at all, as a product of his time, not as a shaper of it. The second is what I call the accidental legacy. This is the legacy of the man who was so consumed by survival, by the daily grind of making ends meet, managing obligations, navigating crises, that he never lifted his head long enough to build with intention. He was not a bad man. He was not a weak man. He was simply reactive for so long that by the time he finally had the space to build something deliberate, the years had already spent themselves. His legacy is the sum of what happened to him, not what he chose. And while there is honor in survival, there is tragedy in a life that could have built something timeless, but instead only managed the immediate. The third, and this is the legacy I am here to call you toward, is what I call the sovereign legacy. This is the legacy of the man who decided, consciously, deliberately, irrevocably, to compete only with himself, to build only from his own vision, to measure only against his own standard, to move in silence until the work was complete, to endure the difficulty of being misunderstood, underestimated, and overlooked, not with bitterness, but with the cold and strategic patience of a man who knows that results, not announcements, are the only currency that matters in the ledger of history. The sovereign legacy man does not chase recognition. He builds something so undeniable that recognition has no choice but to find him. He does not compete for respect. He builds something so unmistakable that respect becomes the only rational response. He does not compare his timeline to another man's. He builds on his own timeline, to his own blueprint, at his own pace, and he trusts, with the deep and earned confidence of a man who has done the work, that every brick he lays in private will be visible in the finished structure that history will judge. Kings, which legacy are you building? And I want you to be honest with yourself, not with me, with yourself, in the privacy of your own mind, right now. For as you hear these words, which of those three men are you? Not which man do you aspire to be? Not which man do you tell people you are? Which man are you today in the specific choices you make before anyone is watching? Because the answer to that question is not a judgment, it is a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is only useful if it leads to a decision. Kings, I want to talk to you now about something that psychology, philosophy, and every great strategic mind throughout history has arrived at from different directions, but always arrived at the same destination: the decision of identity. Most men approach personal development as a project. They want to acquire new skills, earn more money, build better habits, command more respect. And these are worthy pursuits. But they approach them as additions, things to attach to who they already are. They want to add discipline to an undisciplined man, add ambition to a reactive man, add silence to a man who has not yet mastered his own impulses, and it does not work, not sustainably, because you cannot permanently attach a quality to an identity that contradicts it. You can force it for a season, but eventually the identity wins. The man who sees himself as undisciplined will find a reason to break the discipline. The man who sees himself as reactive will find a trigger that pulls him back into reaction. The man who sees himself as someone who competes with others will always find a rival to obsess over, because rivalry confirms the identity he has never actually left. The Stoic philosophers understood this with surgical precision when Epictetus wrote that a man must first decide what kind of person he wishes to be, and then act in accordance with that decision in everything, without exception, without negotiation, without the luxury of selective application. He said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Identity first, action second, not the reverse." The man who wants to stop competing with others does not start by forcing himself to stop watching other men. He starts by deciding and fully committing to the decision that he is a sovereign builder, that his identity is the man who builds from the inside out. That comparison is not merely a bad habit he is trying to break. It is behavior that is incompatible with who he has decided to be. And once that identity is set, truly set, or at the level of belief rather than the level of intention, the behaviors follow naturally. Not easily, not without resistance, but naturally. Because the man who has decided who he is experiences every act of discipline not as deprivation, but as confirmation. Every morning audit, every voluntary discomfort, every silence maintained around his mission, every evening reckoning honestly completed, these do not feel like effort. They feel like identity. And a man acting from identity is unmovable in a way that a man acting from motivation never is. Because motivation runs out. Identity does not. This, kings, is the deepest strategic truth I have ever uncovered across a lifetime of studying power, and 5 centuries of watching it exercised, corrupted, lost, reclaimed, and ultimately either honored or wasted. Decide who you are, then become it, fully, daily, without exception. Kings, I am going to say something now that the world, your school, your culture, your social media, your competitive environment has never told you directly. And it is perhaps the most liberating thing I can offer you in this entire conversation. The men you have been comparing yourself to are also comparing themselves to someone else. Read that again. The man whose salary made you feel inadequate is lying awake at night, measuring himself against his colleague who earned a promotion. The man whose physique triggered your insecurity is in the gym, obsessing over the bodybuilder whose progress he cannot match. The man whose relationship made you feel behind is scrolling through other people's marriages, wondering why his does not look the same. The comparison trap has no top floor. There is no level of achievement that immunity grants. There is no milestone at which the mind, left undisciplined, stops reaching for the next man to measure itself against. I watched this in the courts of Florence. I watched it in the councils of the most powerful men alive. The wealthiest merchants in the city were not satisfied. They were watching the wealthiest merchants in Venice. The most militarily powerful princes were not at peace. They were watching the Ottoman Empire with a mixture of terror and envy that consumed their strategic thinking. The game of comparison is infinite. It has no finish line. It cannot be won by participating in it. It can only be escaped by abandoning it. And the man who abandons it first, who steps out of the infinite loop and starts building something entirely his own, that man does not just win the original race, he makes the original race irrelevant. I wrote in The Prince that nothing makes a prince more esteemed than great undertakings and showing himself to be extraordinary. Not competing, not comparing, not monitoring rivals. Great undertakings. What is your great undertaking, kings? Not the one you will start eventually, not the one that requires perfect conditions, the one that is yours, right now, in this season of your life, with the resources and the time and the discipline you currently possess. Name it. In your own mind, right now. Name it. Because the man who cannot name his great undertaking is the man who will spend his life narrating someone else's. And you, for kings, you were not built to narrate. You were built to lead, to build, to forge something from the raw material of your own singular, unrepeatable, sovereign existence that will outlast every rival you ever obsessed over, and every comparison that ever cost you a night of sleep. That is the Machiavellian way. Not cruelty, not manipulation, not the cynical pursuit of power at any cost. The ruthless, unflinching, 5 centuries tested commitment to building something real, from the inside out, with the only tools that actually work. Self-knowledge, self-mastery, singular focus, disciplined silence, and the sovereign identity of a man who has decided, once and permanently, that he is not in competition with anyone alive. Kings, before I let you go, I have one final thing I want from you. Not a debate this time, not a challenge, on something more powerful than both, a declaration. In the comment section right now, I want you to write the following, and I want you to write it as if you mean it, Because if you have watched this video to this point, you have earned the right to mean it. Right? I am done competing. I am building. And then, beneath it, write the one thing you are building. Not a vague aspiration. One specific thing. Your business. Your body. Your craft. Your family. Your financial freedom. Your faith. Whatever your great undertaking is, name it publicly. Own it. Declare it in a space where other kings can see it and hold you to it. Because declarations made in public carry a weight that private intentions never do. And a man surrounded by other kings who are building, who see his declaration and nod, who add their own, who build a community of sovereign builders in a comment section that the YouTube algorithm will never be able to ignore. That man has just created the most powerful accountability structure available to him. Write it. Right now. Do not scroll past. Do not save it for later. I am done competing. I am building. And then tell me what you are building. I am reading every single one. Kings, we are at the end of this video. And if you have been here from the beginning, if you sat with me through everything I have shared today, then you already know that what I teach on this channel is not entertainment. It is education. Surgical, battle-tested, centuries-refined education in the mechanics of real power. The kind that is built from the inside out. The kind that compounds over decades. The kind that does not depend on rivals, algorithms, some validation, or the approval of men who are still trying to figure out their own lives. So here is what I need from you right now. 3 things, and I want all 3 done before you close this video. First, subscribe. If you are not already subscribed, hit that button right now. Because every video on this channel is another weapon in your arsenal, another chapter in the curriculum, and a king who is building cannot afford to miss a single lesson. Second, leave a comment. Not just the declaration, and though I want that too. Tell me, what was the single most powerful idea in this video that shifted something in your thinking? The idea that landed differently. The sentence that hit. The concept that you are carrying with you into tomorrow. Tell me. Because your answer tells me what to build next. Why, and I build this channel for you. Not for an algorithm. Not for a metric. For you. Third, share this video with one man in your life who is currently trapped. One man you know who is burning his energy watching other men live instead of building his own life. One man whose potential you can see from the outside, even when he cannot see it from the inside. Share it with him directly. Not a tag, not a story. A direct message. 3 words. Watch this. Now. Because kings do not hoard weapons, they distribute them. And the most powerful thing you can do for a man who is stuck is hand him the key to the door he cannot find. Subscribe, comment, share, and I will see you in the next video. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, and you, kings, you were never meant to finish last. You were meant to build empires. Now go.